to naval aviation. And the next morning there was some more discussions and the sense of urgency, I think, on his part and maybe the four-star leadership to move out and get this handled. And then I think after a little bit of time, he actually called me over the weekend and said, well, this is not worth killing a career over. So maybe sit down with your XO and CO, have a discussion with them. I said, it's okay, CO. I said, I've got this. It'll be above the XO and CO. And those two, the pilot and the Wizzo, actually came to see me after an investigation, our standard Field Naval Aviator Evaluation Board investigation. They sat at the end of the table as we had this discussion, and I think they both thought that this could be worth losing wings over. And I got them right to that point, and then said, no, you certainly have embarrassed naval aviation, but you learned your lesson. Clearly, there's some mea culpa work that's going to happen. They both went back, were briefing the communities in Whidbey. The pilot was headed to a job in training command. I said, when you get to your next squadron there, you'll have a similar conversation with them. And I think the last thing I left them with is, if I ever find out that you get a call sign related to this event, you can go wherever you want with that one, Jello. He said, I will come track you down and I will take your wings. And I can't do that now. It's already happened. But I think it impressed upon them the severity of what they had done and why it didn't align with our values in naval aviation, clearly. But I think as naval aviators across the forces, they looked at that and saw that there was clearly some penance to pay, but that they didn't lose wings. I think that was the right message to send.
Society's different, I think, today than it was when you came in. I mean, I'm not condoning behavior, don't get me wrong, but I do think we have to attract the kind of people into this profession that do silly things in Liberty and other places. And again, it's tasteless. I kind of thought it was funny, but it's unfortunate because the environment we're in, there's just no tolerance for something like that anymore. I've always said, have your fun in a way that you're not going to have to explain it later. You can still do silly things and goof off, but it doesn't have to be something where millions of people in Seattle have to see it. So.
Right. I think you characterize that very well.
Okay. So in preparation for this interview, I announced to my audience that I would be taking any of their specific listener questions. So with your permission, I'd like to pose a few from the listener themselves, Admiral. So Vico Vilak asks, what would a future Navy plane look like, let's say after the F-35? So I presume he's specifically talking fighter and attack here.
So I would imagine, as we look at the introduction of unmanned, we'll talk a little bit about that, I think, with one of the other questions. The shape of an F-35, and we talk about radar evading stealth capabilities. I can't imagine we would develop the 6th generation, we call F-35 a 5th generation platform, or Super Hornets 4th generation or 4+, given some of the capabilities we're putting in those later versions of the Super Hornet. But a 6th generation platform, I think you'll see something similar to F-35 design, maybe just a wing, a flying wing kind of a shape, which is some of the shapes that have been rolled out as part of our unmanned carrier platform competition. I think what that platform will look like, whether it be manned or unmanned. I think we'll probably, I've heard the old Secretary of the Navy say F-35 was the last manned aircraft we would have. I don't know that is a true statement. There's a lot of things we're doing in the artificial intelligence world, the ability to connect unmanned platforms with the right software and networks to be able to fly together, integrate and share information together, which really infuse all that information, which is F-35's value. So I think in terms of what it will look like one of the models we've got for this future unmanned platform. I would imagine some kind of just a delta wing or wing body tail like an F-35, and then there will be a way that it operates together with the force of the future, either just through the networks and information passing there, or the way we communicate with unmanned now, or even including artificial intelligence in the way that platform operates and works with other platforms.
And I get that question on the Fighter Pilot podcast all the time. They ask me, what do you think will happen with UAVs? And of course, I always use my standard fallback. If you remember some of the movies like Back to the Future from 30 years ago that all articulates now, they all thought we'd be a lot further along than we are.
Oh, yeah.
But one answer I will sometimes give is I can maybe see a UAV movement, maybe who's flying alongside a manned aircraft, because I still think there's a lot of value, and it sounds like you do too, in having the man, and I use the word man, of course, but I have a caveat in episode 0 about gender pronouns on the show. But, there is a need, I think, still, and certainly artificial intelligence will make a difference as well, but for people in there making those split-second decisions, because in a lot of cases we still do it better than a machine. But maybe reconnaissance, surveillance, aerial refueling, those could be some of the first steps for UAVs in the Navy?
Well, that's exactly where we're going. Right now we're flying an unmanned helicopter, the Fire Scout, MQ-8 Fire Scout. We just delivered to the fleet the first of the MQ-4 Tritons, which is a model after the Broad Air Maritime Surveillance Global Hawk. It will be a wingman, a counterpart to the P-8 Poseidon that's coming along. So it will do large area maritime surveillance and just suck up lots of information about what's in the maritime environment and share that information across the force. The Fire Scout does the same thing. We also armed the Fire Scout so it can now be a wingman to a MH-60 Romeo or Sierra, and certainly can fly when those platforms are not flying. And I think been integrated very successfully in our littoral combat ships and some of our other smaller surface platforms. I expect that integration will continue to happen. We're just learning the first orbits of those Tritons will be in the Pacific Fleet this coming late this year. So when that plays out exactly how we see it, that I think will be more of a strategic asset that the fleet commander might use, not a strike group commander, which is why we got to the point, or why we pushed so hard to get an asset that the carrier strike group commander owns, that flies from the carrier deck as part of the air wing that is unmanned. That's where we are with MQ-25. We're now in the final phases, I think, of the final industry proposals and down selection to the one we'll go with. And that will bring us, you said it up front, it's a surveillance and understand what's going on around the carrier strike group. It's also, and this is where we kind of worked through with Secretary Work, DepSecDef a while back, when he looked at the other ISR, intelligence surveillance reconnaissance platforms that are available to the strike group commander. He said, you don't need that in the strike group. I said, well, you absolutely do, because those assets are strategic assets. They get drug off for higher priority missions than the strike group, what's happening in and around the carrier and the strike group. So we need one we can control and manage from the flight deck. And I think that's where we'll get. It will be a tanker slash, I'll say a big T and a little I for the ISR. I can say that now as, old air boss.
No one can hold you to it, right?
The tanker mission is key as well. I think it will extend the reach of the air wing. We still have, between how far our strike fighters can go now and the weapons that they are carrying to reach out and touch other surface or air platforms, are pretty good. Now, adding additional 500 or so miles from an unmanned mission tanker will extend that reach even further. And I won't get into the numbers of that, but it will really help, I think, address some of the folks that say we've gone from an air wing that used to go 1,000 miles now to one that just can barely get to 500 or 600. But I think the combination of a tanker that can also do some maritime surveillance for you, give the strike group a better sense of what's going on around it, and eventually get to the point where that platform can fly in contested environments. I think that was where we were going early on before we got redirected and sort of adjusted in our procurement process with the Deputy Secretary of Defense. So then I think there'll be something that evolves after that when we talk about what's the future being an F-35 or those unmanned strike fighters or strike and attack airplanes. I think it's a bright future. Unlike the Air Force, I don't believe, at least when I left, we did not plan to create an unmanned community like the Air Force has done. They've got a lot of challenges with that, and I'm hopeful that Admiral Miller, as he continues to move forward and starts to deliver some of these platforms, we can stay with that concept. We will do single seat tours or shore tours where we operate those unmanned platforms, but then go back to flying your regular platform in the fleet. It's working in the Fire Scouts, it's working in the Triton so far, and we'll start to evolve that. Hopefully we can do that with the platforms that go on our carriers and operate with our air wings.
So the air crew might take a tour off and fly those.
Exactly, but then get right back in the cockpit.
So they kind of mix and match. Okay, very cool. All right, my next listener question is from Jim Hendershot, who wonders, do you see the increased reliance on computerization and networking as a risk due to aggressive hacking efforts by various governments and other organizations?
I think you've got to think about that, and I know as we work with NavAir in delivering platforms, and then obviously all the ways that those platforms are going to talk to each other through the networks, absolutely critical that they happen, but networking is both a risk and a mandate. We have to be able to share information, and not just with our own Naval Aviation Forces, but with our other joint partners as well, with Marine Corps, F-35s, and other assets they're flying, and then certainly with Air Force as well. But I think because of that we build in and think about the hardening and how we're going to protect those systems as we go through the acquisition process and eventually deliver them to the fleet, there will be the ability to respond and adapt and add additional hardening or mitigations as we deliver those to the fleet. There is an increased reliance, certainly, but but I think we're managing the risks associated with that, and it's a mandate to do all of that, to sense what's out there, share that information. It has to happen in hardened networks, and we've got to ensure that that we can do that without the enemy finding out. So we'll keep those efforts up and very much focus on ensuring that happens in a secure environment.
I don't know if you remember where you were on December 31st, 1999, but I was deployed on John F. Kennedy. And if you recall at the time, the Y2K was a big issue.
Yeah.
So we actually did not fly that next day because, all these jets are electronic now. So they turned everything all day and made sure everything was good.
Yeah.
We flew January 2nd.
Yeah. So, it's a concern. Yeah.
All right. Another listener question. Peter Johnson wants to know if you see the ongoing demarcation lines between Air Force, Marines, Navy, and then the possibility of a Space Force staying or potentially merging of air assets, including UAVs.
I kind of alluded to in the last discussion we had on as we start integrating and networking our forces. And this will happen, as I said, not just at the air wing or strike group level, but it'll happen as we start operating carriers with amphibious strike groups that'll be operating F-35Bs, which we're already doing right now in the Western Pacific. And then in any major contingency, we may be the first ones there with a carrier in the air wing, the strike group, but we're going to quickly be followed with our Marine Corps partners and Air Force partners, and it will be an all-in effort. All three will be there, so interoperability will absolutely be critical. We've learned a lot as we moved into a single F-35. Well, it's really three versions, but into the F-35 and the uniqueness of trying to build three services requirements with one platform. And just reading the other day where it looks like we may go away from the Joint Program Office to the three services kind of managing their own unique platforms. And that's probably the right thing to do. But I see, at least until we get to space, and I'll talk space here in a second, we'll all keep I think kind of our unique identities, but as we focus and train and work up together, certainly with major exercise like you're familiar with down in Fallon or in Nellis with the Air Force or up in Alaska, we do a lot of very good training up there. We bring everybody together, and we have to do that so that we are ready for that major contingency. As we move into space, that's another domain that we clearly are paying very close attention to. In fact, you watched in the press we talked about, do we want to create a combatant commander for space? And right now it resides under strategic command, the Stratcom commander. But I think we'll eventually get there. And as we move into space, there are certainly requirements that Navy will need that are fed from space. I mean, as we try and characterize that battle space, it includes not just the platforms we're flying here, but certainly satellites it might put up in space, other sensing platforms that we would have to be connected with. So whether we put that under one command or if we continue to have our own service equities met, but in some kind of a joint world, I think that's where we'll be. But we certainly need to integrate those future platforms up in space as well.
Sure. No, I've always thought of making everyone fly the F-35 is a lot like making every family drive the same car, right? So some families have 4 or 5 kids, and some quote-unquote families are one successful business person who maybe wants a sports car. So it's tough to do, but I understand for the same reasons we talked about before, is that someone else is in many ways controlling our destiny when it comes to the personal use. All right, next question is from Kai Aiello, who is my brother. He asks, how concerned should we be at recent reports on aviation readiness?
So I would answer your brother. I was very concerned, and that was, as I've talked about already, probably the most challenging piece of the job for 3 years was aviation readiness. I do see the trends that are in the right direction. After the years since sequestration, as we dug a pretty big bathtub, I said divot earlier, but it's a bathtub-sized hole we dug, and as we talked to Congress and kept our narrative going, and it was carried by CNO, by the vice chief, certainly carried a lot of water force in Congress, making sure that they understood that was, and CNO used to talk about sort of the confluence of 3 major things was the lack of the budgets, the uncertainty of those budgets, and the continued op-tempo, where demand for our forces was exceeding our ability to supply those forces. But I think there's an understanding now that even up through the highest levels in the Department of Defense that